Hamster wheel and into balanced living with Dr. Marissa.
Promise you joy in the mystery.
Dr. Marissa, also known as the Asian Oprah. Her mission, to be a beneficial presence on the planet. Her purpose, to be your personal advocate to live, laugh, love, learn. Her life motto, don't die wondering. Take back your life with Dr. Marissa Pay.
And welcome. You are tuned into my weekly talk radio TV show called Take My Advice. I'm not using it. Get balanced with Dr. Marissa every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time and Saturday at 6 on my CNBC NBC News radio channel KCAA, AM 1050, FM 102.3, and FM 106.5, streaming everywhere at either kcaaradio.com, on my Dr. Marissa YouTube channel, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it, I'm there because I'm on a happy 88 mission. I want you to be happy 88% of the time, and the goal is 88 million in the next 8 years. So thank you for joining me. My show is about hope and happiness. So there's no gossip, no scandal, and I used to say no K words, no Kardashian talk, but apparently Kim Kardashian is doing some great things, so I can't say that anymore. But we've been focusing on the topic of ending racism. I started the series back when George Floyd was killed with It's Not Black and White, or is it? And as we progress, unfortunately, things that happen in the news are usually not happy news, but they do allow us to be notified of areas that need some healing. So the latest being with the focus on Asian American hate and Asian American crimes. I've been doing another series, and it's, I don't necessarily like to say is it yellow and white or not, because I'm not crazy about that color, but we certainly want to highlight those things about Asian American hate and stop AAPI hate, to understand what we need to do in this particular area. And I'm happy to say that I ran into a group. I saw their email, and that group is AAPI's Rising. And I love the shift from stopping hate to choosing solidarity and people of color, helping people of color. So if you missed any of those episodes, go to my YouTube channel as well. You can see a variety of topics, from how to reduce your risk of cancer with Fran Drescher to, the different love languages, you name it. Go to my YouTube channel, subscribe for free, and you'll get those shows. Today, I'm very delighted and honored to have two members of that coalition that got together to help end racism. And I'm going to not do well with their introductions. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, because you know who you are better than I do. And it's better than just reading the introductions. So the format, though, is I have a friend. She doesn't have an answering machine. She has a questioning machine. And when you call her, she says, "Who are you? And what do you want?" So we'll start with Deepa. Who are you and what do you want?
Thanks so much for having us. We're happy to be here. So my name is Deepa Iyer. I'm a South Asian American lawyer, writer, and activist. And I am with the Building Movement Project and Solidarity Is, where I focus on social change and solidarity practice. What I want is more people in our country to become aware of how they can play a role in addressing issues of equity and justice.
Beautiful. See, you did it much better than I could have done that. Becky Belcore, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you also for having us. My name is Becky Belcore. I use she, her pronouns. I work with a national progressive Asian American organization called NACASAC, and I am based in Chicago. I'm a Korean American adoptee. And what I really want is for our Asian American community to be well organized into a strong progressive force that can then join with other progressive communities of color and change the world together. That's what I really want.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we're moving towards that end. And certainly as we pass this particular interview around, I think that it will be very helpful. We just had Connie Chung Jo on a couple weeks ago, and they have, actual tips on how to, if you're witnessing a crime, what to do. So all of that information is fabulous. So I do get a little personal with my guests. I love to hear, sort of how you got into this and why, your own little journey into, did you know when you were a kid that this is what you'd be doing? We'll start with that. Let's go back to Deepa.
No, I don't think so. I grew up in India and immigrated to the United States when I was 12, and we landed in Kentucky. And so, as you can imagine, it was obviously a cultural shift, but it was also at a time in the mid to late 1980s where race was really kind of a black or white binary. And for folks like me and my family, it was really unclear and where we fit, right, if at all. And so I think those experiences of not belonging and not feeling welcomed became a theme for me to explore throughout my life. And so through college and law school, and then through work in the Asian American community spaces, which is where I first got started, I've been looking for sort of a community home and a political home. And I found it in Asian America, in different nonprofit progressive organizations and spaces. So that's a little bit of my point of entry.
Fabulous. When you were a kid and got the recognition, quote unquote, for being different, was it a positive or not so positive experience?
It was a not so positive experience for me anyway. And I don't know that that's super different from a lot of people who are immigrants, right? I had an accent when I came here. I looked different. And it was pretty obvious that I didn't fit in sort of the norms of what we consider to be American. And so certainly those experiences stuck with me, and to see my parents also have to deal with that. Those are formative experiences, right? And they stay with you. And so they certainly have influenced me.
Yes, that was a leading question, because I also had that in a very small town in Ontario. No, 3 diverse families. That was it. Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these, cornered in a stairwell. Not the best experience with looking different. So I'm asking that question to have you think about individually. So people who are tuning in now who are feeling that kind of discrimination, what can you advise them on a personal level on what it was that helped you get out of that? I know we're here primarily talking about the organizations, but I think I'd be missing an opportunity. I just facilitated a listening session for the city of Santa Monica, and there was a gentleman there who's never been able to talk about the kind of pain and hurt for being singled out for looking the way he did. So I want to take the opportunity on a personal level. How do you deal with that kind of hurt and pain? So I'll let you think about that and go to Becky and have her answer the first question. Did you know you were going to be doing this?
No, similarly, I had no idea I would be doing this. As I mentioned, I'm a Korean American adoptee, so I was adopted from Korea when I was 1 year old by a white family. And similar to Deepa, I also grew up in the South, so in Virginia and in Alabama. And I know today a lot of folks talk about the growing Asian American community in the South, but back then when I was growing up, that was not the case. And for us, I was one of 3 Asian Americans. Actually, all 3 of us are Korean adoptees, one of whom was my brother, in our all-white schools and high school. And yeah, it was a really hard experience. The kind of racial slurs that we're hearing today in the news, like, you don't belong here, go back to China. That's what we constantly heard growing up. My nickname that the kids gave me was flat face. They made fun of my eyes all the time. And my brother actually, during gym class, was beaten up and his hand was broken, and as they called him, Chink, and threw him against the wall. So those were really scary and significant experiences that I think really shaped our lives and the way that we looked at our lives. But at the same time, we also because we were in the South, really grew up with the rich history of the civil rights movement all around us. And so we're very fortunate to be exposed to some of those movement learnings, and really knowing that if people organize together, they can actually make change. And so while we were experiencing that as Asian Americans, we also were learning about this rich history that had caused transformative change for communities of color. So I think that also informed me as I was getting older.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was heavy too as a child, so they would call me a chunk, which is a fat chink. So that was a tough one too. So all of these, are shaping, right? And we do find a way out of that fire of alchemization, as I call it. We rise as Phoenix. My Chinese middle name is actually Phoenix. So I'm living up to that. But tell me a little of your work now and what the impact or what the hope vision is for the coalition as well as your individual groups. So we'll start with Becky this time.
So to answer your kind of the earlier question as well, I think, especially as an adoptee who was growing up with a white family in an all-white community, but really my journey to myself and my own Asian American identity was something that I had to make a conscious decision to do and to seek out. And so in my early 20s is when I first found NACASAC. They were offering these different kinds of classes in Korean language and history and social movements. And so I started to go to those classes, and that's where I really found my community. And for the first time, really felt affirmed in who I am as a Korean American, as an Asian American, and as an Asian American woman and woman of color. So I would say to people who are experiencing this pain that we experience in the isolation that we can live in as people of color in this land, to really, I know it does take courage, because there's always that fear of rejection, because it's that same rejection that we experience by oftentimes the institutions that we're growing up in. But the risk is definitely worth it. And I feel that kind of affirmation here at NACASAC and also within the National Asian American Leaders Table that Deepa and I are a part of. And so I think, through that work, we're able to really hear from the diverse members of our community. So, there's that myth that the Asian American community is a monolith, that we're all the same, but, we're made up of over 20 different ethnicities. And I think some of our solidarity stories do share about that. Like, how can we acknowledge that diversity within our community and even build solidarity among ourselves, and then be able to go out and build solidarities with other racial groups as well. And so I think that's a lot of the work that we're doing now to try to build so that we can address this anti-Asian and racism together.
Yeah, that's great. And which is why I was so excited to get the email from Sean. Is it Cyan or Sean? It's Cyan, right? Cyan, that's it. So because, you say hate so many times, it starts sort of coloring the whole effort. So I understand at the beginning we were stop AAP, I hate, totally for it. But I'm also one who understands or teaches or preaches the law of attraction. And the more we hate, it's the same energy that is being directed for us. So choosing solidarity really that was the breath of fresh air that I was looking for in all of our efforts going forward. Yeah, Becky, that's you had an interesting choice to make, coming from a completely white adopted into that's all you know. At what age or what experience did you realize that you don't look like your parents? Obviously you were adopted, or what was that moment like?
I think I always knew. I mean, they always told us that my brother and I, that we were adopted, but the messages that you get all around you just reinforce that every day. Like, for example, my mother's mother, my grandmother, wouldn't even come see us for the first couple years because she was opposed to my parents adopting children from Asia. And then, as I was sharing about the different remarks that we get from other kids at school, I even remember overhearing my mother on the phone once when one of my friends at school's parents was calling her to say that her daughter couldn't play with me anymore because she didn't want her daughter playing with a child of color. And so I think it was just something I've always known. And actually, I was reflecting on this as there has been more attention being paid to anti-Asian um, incidents, is that I can't actually remember a time in my life I haven't been very conscious that I'm Asian American. I feel like it's been a very defining experience for my life. But kind of to your point around hate and love and kind of those juxtapositions, that what I feel really fortunate about is that over time, because I was able to find a political home and I was able to find my community, it's something that I now feel great pride and courage from. It used to be something that I felt ashamed of and I felt hatred towards myself about. But because of these kinds of organizations that are out there, they really can help you find yourself and find your own empowerment as a person.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I think that message of hope is so important right now, with the spotlight being on Asian Americans and the identity and the heritage and all of that. Could you just spell out what the not your organization the letters stand for?
Yes, it's very long.
Yes.
It stands for the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium, NAKASAC.
Okay. I don't know if that helped me or not.
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Just to call it NAKASAC.
Not you. And I'm just putting up now on my favorite part of this StreamYard is the ticker tape. So if you're looking for their organization, you'll be able to see it on the bottom scrolling there. Deepa, your organization.
Sure. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I heard an echo. So my point of entry in community spaces has been really looking at issues affecting Asian Americans through a civil rights lens. And one of my kind of defining moments was actually right after the 9/11 attacks. And it's hard to believe that this is the 20th anniversary of September 11th. But right after the 9/11 attacks, it was really obvious that, our country was sort of going through a double grieving in a sense, obviously for what happened on that day. But then for South Asian, Muslim, Arab, and Sikh communities, it was really clear that, our communities would be the targets of the anger that people felt. So we started to see hate violence, and we also then saw state violence. So both in terms of attacks and assaults and discrimination, schoolyard bullying, profiling on airplanes, right? But also state policies that ended up detaining, deporting, surveilling many of our community members. And so that, that kind of climate really catalyzed me to think about how can I use my privileges, how can I use my networks to return to my community? And so I was really fortunate to be able to build an organization along with others that worked in the South Asian American space called SALT, South Asian Americans Leading Together. And I spent 10 years working at SALT. And one of the things I really learned in sort of the 10 years after 9/11 is the importance of multiracial solidarity practice, that we could not just work in our silos to address these extremely difficult issues, that we had to reach across and build with other communities as well. And so where I am right now is an organization called the Building Movement Project, where I run a project on solidarity. And so we provide resources, we do workshops and trainings, and we support communities that are trying to come together on working on different issues and really talk about some of the difficulties, right? Because solidarity is this word that sounds great, but it's really hard to do. So when you think about practicing it as a verb, right, there are a lot of hiccups. People are like, well, we don't know enough about each other, so we don't trust. Or there is oppression Olympics, right? Like my pain is worse than yours. There are lots of things that come up, right? And so part of what we try to do with the project, which is called Solidarity is really try to make sure that folks have the tools, the language, and the resources to engage in meaningful solidarity practice beyond hashtags and slogans. But actually, what does it mean one-on-one? What does it mean community to community? What does it mean organization to organization? So that's the work that I'm doing right now. But it's so much of it is informed by the work I did in the Asian American and South Asian American space.
Wow. Oppression Olympics. There's my giant term takeaway. I've not ever heard that, but it's true. If you think I remember when I first started posting even about Black Lives Matter, people were jumping on my post saying, yeah, but what about the Native Americans? And what about, and it was an oppression Olympics. You think you had it bad, we've got it worse. So wow, thank you for that. And if you've just tuned in and you're wondering who my two wonderful guests are today, you are tuned in to Take My Advice. I'm not using it. Get balanced with Dr. Marissa. And today we're focused again, this time shifting a little from hashtag stop AAPI hate to hashtag AAPI's rising and hashtag, this is the punctuation era, choose solidarity. And my two guests, Becky Belcore and Deepa Iyer, are here to illuminate me and educate me on this new movement, a coalition of Asian Americans, AAPIs, getting together to try to form not an isolated effort, but all towards working together as Asians as well as together with other people of color. Now, I'm going to put one moose on the table, which is my Canadian version of the elephant in the room. This whole Asian solidarity. I have to be perfectly honest with you. When I grew up in my Chinese home, not all Asians were equal. When I lived in Singapore for a year, because my father was a professor and he would go every 6 years on a sabbatical, I got to live at the University of Singapore campus. There was a distinct class system amongst Asians, right? And so I sometimes half jokingly say that I think Chinese are one of the most prejudiced group. We carry prejudices within the group of Asians, like so-and-so is here and then next and all the way down the line, usually based on how much darker tint is in the skin, which is like I got yelled at and punished if I went out in the sun if I went out in the sun, because if I got tanned, that was lowering my value as an Asian. So how do you deal with that kind of internal classification? Do you come across that at all? Deepa's nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this is true within many communities, right? I don't think it's necessarily unique to Asian communities, but absolutely, right? Because I think part of it is that we are always trying to live on this ladder of hierarchy to try to kind of get to the top, and there are very few. It's scarcity, right? There's not enough, is what we're often told. I mean, in the Indian community, which is where I'm from, there is hierarchy around color, just like you said, but there's also one around caste. There's also one around class. And there is also a lot of anti-Blackness that people have consumed and that they then put out there, right? And so it's not the case that one of our friends and a fellow activist, Bo Urabe, talks about complex unity, that Asian Americans have complex unity, right? Like it's not that we all come together just automatically, that it's something that we have to work on, and that we see ourselves as, when we are together as a political and have a political identity, as Becky said earlier, progressive political identity that's grounded in solidarity and justice, then we're able to come together. But we can't just paper over all of these differences that you mentioned that do exist, which is why we have to do our work within as well as across other communities. It's really important to do both.
Is it a generational thing where we just have to wait until the new generation gets it? Because I know that the older generation, there are lots of prejudices. I know that in my family, because of what they went through with the Japanese occupation growing up in China, there's very strong anti-Japanese, and to have solidarity between Japanese and Chinese, it would be like not encouraged at all. How do we deal with that internal stuff? Becky?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all grow up with it no matter where in the world we're growing up. Like we're all taught to value money above human beings. We're all taught to value lighter skin above darker skin. So it's all things I think all of us, regardless of what immigrant generation we are or even where in the world we're growing up, have to unlearn. And so I don't think it's, yeah. So I think that, some of that is learning that we need to do within our own communities, as Deepa was talking about. And so I think it's our own political education to really think about why these systems of oppression exist and what it's doing to us as a community and as a people and what's it's intended to do, especially when it sometimes also pits us against each other, even within our community and other communities of color. I mean, like one example internally for us is that, of the 11 million undocumented immigrants, 2 million are Asian American. And so there can be a lot of shame felt around that, even though, it's people come to this country for many different reasons, often because they want a better life for their families and their children, which is something that should be honored and always supported. But because, we have all this broken immigration system, folks aren't able to adjust their status. But, and so there could be things within our community where those of us who may have documented status look down on those who don't. And so it's doing that education around why that's not right and being able to see that as we as a community to be able to really be united together and to go and to be able to be lifted up together, we need to think about all of us and we need to change systems so all of us can have the same kind of access to everything. So I think that's some of the education that we've been doing in our community for many years, and we've seen progress around that. It could have been before there was no support for undocumented folks, whereas today you'll see groups starting to form funds to support people in getting the deferred action for childhood arrivals, being able to pay those application fees, for example. That's a shift that we've seen in our community over the last 10 to 15 years as a result of that education. And I think similarly with anti-Blackness, that Deepa was referencing, that's work that we have to do as well that impacts us in terms of how, like, as you were talking about, the colorism that occurs in our own community, but then also how we're able to build solidarity with other communities as well. That's work that we need to do ourselves multi-generationally.
Absolutely. I always found it quite ironically interesting that that anti-Blackness, except for where do people want to go on vacation, is go get a tan. So I always thought that was a little bit strange. Now, going back to when you were saying 9/11, Deepa, I actually became American, the first immigration group after 9/11. So that is something like so close to my heart. And when you said 20 years ago, I'm like, that was 20 years ago? Oh my gosh, I must be having fun because the time has definitely flown. But so how do we, have you experienced, because I think, with that term model minority, the term, Asians and their culture. And I know that for me, I grew up with the saying, the nail that stands up is hammered down. The Chinese carpenter is asked, do you do good work? And he'll say, oh, no, it's just average. That pullback, or the part of the culture that says, don't speak up, don't form groups, don't get involved, don't help, those less fortunate. That's up to them because, everybody is in charge of their own destiny. Have you come across that, and how do you work through that, Deepa?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have a real soft spot or love for first generation immigrants, because I think that there are lots of reasons why people responded that way, right? Or continue to respond that way. There is this sense, as Becky was saying, that, you want to make sure that you're able to provide for your family. And part of doing that, you're told and you see, is to just kind of hunker down, right? And not get involved and not speak up. And so I think it's the immigrant experience for so many communities. So I think that groups like NACASAC or SALT and others that are part of this National Asian American Leaders Table are newer formations, right? They're formations for the most part by second generation immigrants who, for whatever reason, were politicized. So in my experience, for example, we worked with a lot of South Asians who were politicized after 9/11. because it isn't possible, right? I mean, in this country, I feel like you have this perception of Asians as like spelling bee champions, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs on one hand, but there's another really, really pervading impression, right? The yellow peril, the brown horde, the perpetual foreigner, the suspected terrorist, the disloyal individual, right? So these are all themes, and now a public health threat when we think about what folks have had to deal with COVID. So these are all themes and actual realities that our communities have had to deal with. And so I think that it's really important for us to understand that as we build in our communities, we're talking to people who have lived with those kinds of themes and perceptions, and are trying to make their way to understand those. I do think that we have a new generation, you mentioned this earlier, Marissa, of folks who are really engaged, right? I think that I run across so many younger Asian Americans, their analysis. I mean, I never had it at that age. And I'm so grateful and excited that they are going to be leading their communities and movements in the future, because, these are like high school, college students, young people who understand concepts much better than I think we did. So I do think it changes from generation to generation. Yeah. And I think that the one thing that does that, though, is community building. I think that is critical. It's a critical strategy for us to build community within our own communities and with others. That, I think, is the strategy to deepen and follow.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. There's a lot of terms. I'm going to have to rewind and write them down, all of those. But if you've just tuned in, you are tuned in to Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It, Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa. We're going to take a quick break to thank the sponsors who make the show possible. If you'd like to be a sponsor of the show about hope and happiness, please do contact me for affordable rates, especially during COVID season. We'll be right back in 2 and 2. Peace in, peace out, world peace through inner peace.
Want delicious Vietnamese Asian fusion cuisine that is so good for your health you won't believe your taste buds? Olac is a 100% plant-based vegan restaurant founded by Mai on living foods and a love for animals that won't make you sacrifice taste for health. 2 locations to delight you, downtown LA and Fountain Valley. So go to www.olac.com, AULAC, to book your reservation today. Saving the planet has never tasted so good.
Welcome back. You are tuned into Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It, Get Balanced with Dr. Marissa. This is my 473rd consecutive week on the air, on camera. We're moving from hate to solidarity with my 2 great guests today, Becky Belcore and Deepa Iyer, who are here as part of the coalition that is looking at uniting or consolidating in solidarity Asian communities as well as other people of color. I guess that would be the step after, in the effort to end racism, which we definitely know we need, thanks to Capitol Hill, thanks to the terms of Asian Chinese virus and the Kung flu that our past person was so liberally encouraging. And I do credit him with one thing, and that's ripping off the Band-Aid that was covering the infection of discrimination and prejudice in America. So the good news is the pus is out, the light is hitting it. We're healing all of those deep infections now, and the efforts by you two, I'm grateful. I'm also going to give you right now the Dr. Marissa Beneficial Presence on the Planet Award. Work that you're doing, I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to give you a little personal acknowledgement.
Thank
Becky,
you.
of course. Becky, did you want to add anything to what we were talking about before? Do we remember what we were talking about? Sorry, I'm throwing that to you because I mean, it's all good.
We'd love to tell you about the solidarity story. So maybe Becky,
yes, please,
you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think as we've been referencing all along as we've been speaking with you, the kind of change that our community as an Asian American Pacific Islander community needs to see, some of that has to do with the work that we need to do internally as a community that our National Asian American Leaders Table has really proactively taken on. And part of that work has to do with the work we have to do with other communities as well. And so I think the solidarity stories are accounts that really talk about what the power of building solidarity is, what the need for it is, what some of the challenges are, and why it's worth it. And I think one common message that pervades throughout a lot of the stories is that it's kind of that saying that none of us are free until we are all free, that all of our stories are really very interconnected. A lot of what we're experiencing as Asian Americans right now with racism is experienced by other communities within our Asian community as well, along with other communities of color. And so that those are places of pain we can unite around, but they're also places of power and pride that we can unite around as well. And I think the stories really convey that too. And so, yeah, we're really excited. We hope folks will be able to use these stories as a way to build solidarity within their own communities and with other communities in their local environments.
Great. And where do they contribute that?
So you can find.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, you can find the solidarity stories at www.solidaritystories.org. And as Becky mentioned, it's basically an archive of stories that you can learn about with short video clips and case studies, and then reflection questions. So if you want to learn, for example, about the way in which Japanese American elders who were incarcerated during World War II built solidarity by connecting with other communities, Native Americans and Latinx communities, in the wake of the Trump administration policy to separate children from their families, this is a place you can go, right? And it's also a way you can learn about these stories that are not often heard or told. We wanted to really lift up stories that are invisible or unheard, so that folks know about rich history of solidarity practice between Asian American, Pacific Islander, and other communities, but also within the Asian American community itself. So it's a toolkit you can get information about. It's solidaritystories.org.
Oops, I did .com. I have to fix that. I knew I did. This is the just-in-time fixing here. ORG, and there we go. Perfect. So these are personal stories. These are the goal of this is the vision for this solidarity stories is. What are we hoping to do?
Yeah, we're hoping for three things. One is to learn, right? To learn about histories and experiences. The second is to actually take time to reflect and share. So in a discussion group, conversation at your dinner table with your family, if you're a student, a conversation in your classroom or campus group, right? So you can actually share these stories and reflect together. So it builds community. And then the third is that we really want people to integrate some of what they're learning about into their own lives and into their own communities. So if you've learned about the solidarity practice of, anchoring within your values, maybe you will think about what are my values, right, when it comes to addressing social injustice. And you'll learn from some of these stories and some of the people that we've featured. So you can do that too. So learn, discuss, and integrate.
Great. And anybody can submit their stories there. Is that what So
they don't, we're hoping to get there. Right now, we've just featured, the stories that we've collected and interviewed. And then over time, we're hoping that we can gather more. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to take submit out. Otherwise, people are going to be submitting all these stories. Okay. Visit. I got it. Third time.
There you go. You did
it. Beautiful. So, you were mentioning younger generation. I just love the fact that, this belligerent, quote unquote, belligerent generation of millennials who we were just a little concerned about their attitudes is turning out to be the best positive force for change in this time where change is so desperately needed. So kudos to the millennials and those that follow for your adamancy. I mean, it's my daughters who said, no, Mom, you can't say that. Or no, Mom, you can't wear that. That's cultural appropriation. I'm like, what? I love wearing my Indian dresses to the red carpet. And they get mad at me. So I'm grateful. I just wanted to mention to all the young people that are involved in this effort to end racism. Good for you. Kudos to you. So personally, with your parents and with your kids, I'm assuming you have both, what kinds of messages? So this is for parents who are Asian American, AAPI, parents who want to instill a different experience in owning your heritage. What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I have a 13-year-old daughter. So we're both transitioning in terms of her being a teenager, I feel like, not just her. And as you were saying, yes, I get a lot of the stop, don't, those, yes, kind of instructions as well. So I think what's important, I want to make sure, especially given my own experience as an adoptee, that is rooted in community so that she doesn't feel isolated. And I know that in the end, it's a choice that she'll make as she gets older. Like right now, I can just take her with me and there she is. But I'm hoping that will seed something so that even if she decides not to be as active in the community during times of her life, that she knows that it is there for her, and that that's a place that she can come to for comfort, for political education, for growth, both personally and politically. I think that all of our community members need that kind of, like as Deepa called it, a political home that she will always have. And I heard on the radio this morning, they were saying that this time is really a political awakening for our next generation, what's been happening. And so we're really excited about that as well. We've been seeing our young people in our community already taking that kind of leadership, as Deepa was referring to, but that this is definitely making that broader. And I think another great thing about our solidarity stories too is that, when these moments happen, people do want to know, what can I do? How can I get involved? And I feel like a lot of the stories also share ways that you can plug in, both in ways where you can take a leadership role sometimes when it's your community that's being centered in what's happening, but also how you can play a support role in a respectful way that is also can be just as meaningful. And so I hope that our next generation also looks at these stories so it can be instructive to them and into how to really participate and build their own leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Deepa?
I love what you said, Becky. And what I would say, so I have an almost 11-year-old, so I guess a little bit behind you, Becky, and I have a tween, so I'm already seeing some of what you mentioned. I think that in our case, one of the things that we've tried to do and that I always talk about is the importance of having conversations that are pretty direct and about racism, about injustice, right? And I think that sometimes we want to kind of inoculate and protect our children away from that, but they see things, right? They are very perceptive and they can understand things at a very young age. So I think it's important to find, age appropriate ways to talk about oppression, to talk about injustice, and to talk about resilience and to talk about solidarity, right? And so, for example, over the past summer, as you mentioned, Marissa, when you started the series after the murder of George Floyd, in our neighborhood, there are a lot of signs that say Black Lives Matter. And so when we're going on walks, if my son says, why is there a sign like that even has to say that, right? It's an opening. And it's an opportunity to have a discussion and a conversation. So I think utilizing the curiosities that I think young people have, or the experiences they have to have these open conversations is really something we can do as parents.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I have recovering teenagers. I always joke, when people say, do you, are do you, thank you for being patient. And I say, no, the last time I prayed for patience, I got teenagers. So, but that's really awesome. So as usual, I ran out of time. But I do have one last question that I ask all of my guests, which is, to who or to what are you most grateful for? So we'll start with Becky. What is your answer to that question?
So referencing our next generation as we have been, I am really grateful for our young people in our community, particularly our young undocumented Asian American leaders who have been instrumental in pushing forward a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants in this country and keeping our families together, that they'll stop being separated through the detentions and deportations. Their leadership and their courage inspires me every single day, and I'm just so grateful for them.
Awesome. And Deepa?
I would say, just on a more personal note, I'm really grateful to my parents, because I think that, as we talked about from when we started off from the personal level, I think that for parents like mine who came to this country not really understanding or knowing, right, these issues of justice, solidarity, they've had to kind of watch their daughter take a really different path. And I'm really grateful to them for their patience and for their ability to kind of push themselves to actually understand what I'm trying to do, and to have conversations about it with their own friends and their family network, right? So I've really seen a progression. Like you talked about young folks. So I'll close by talking about like the first generation and the progression that we can see in our own families as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a great... Deepa up for all of those little nuggets of terms that I've never heard of, which is really awesome. But thank you. I wish you all the best. Let me know if I can be of help in any way. But for all of the listeners, or anybody that wants, if you want, they say awareness is the first step in change. I think that's true, but the most important step is the willingness to change, which comes after awareness. So I'm hoping that all of these shows, we end the hashtag justified ignorance that seems to be going around. If you're a supporter of Asian American AAPI communities, please do something about it. Now you've got a great next step, going to solidaritystories.org to read that, have the discussions, keep this open so that Asian American AAPI hate and crime is not what's left in the forefront, but the healing and the progress and moving towards a racism-free America is what we really envision. So thank you so much, and peace in, peace out, world peace through, inner peace to you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Of course. All right. And we are now at the end of the show where I get to, cajole you into joining me for some balance activities. I want to just announce that in 2 weeks, we're having the great Hank Garrett. Those of you who might remember the show, Where Are You, Car 52? He also had that, they say, the #1 fight scene in a movie with Robert Redford. So I'm so delighted to announce that he's going to be here in 2 weeks, Thursday at 4 p.m. So keep it tuned here. Next week, we're going to have a special guest, a surprise guest, who's been on the news a lot covering AAPI hate and crimes in Northern California. So stay tuned for that. As well, please do go to Amazon Smile, put in 8 Ways to Happiness so you can support my nonprofit, which is 8 Ways to Happiness, helping kids, teens, and young adults who have temporarily forgotten their birthright to happiness. So Smile Amazon has an 8 Ways to Happiness link where you do your shopping. When you shop there, Amazon will give a little to the nonprofit. If you would like to actually donate, straight donation, that would be also awesome. You could go, and right now you get a free viewing of the following film. Actually, you get a free download of the actual short film, my first short film that I have produced and directed. Here's a little trailer. What if conforming to the world was exploring the world? What if the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, little girl, turns into how many streets of life you want to explore? What if the purpose of life is not to die with the most toys to leave our squabbling relatives? What if the purpose of life was to do things that we enjoy most of the time, have relationships that we enjoy most of the time, and use our unique talents, gifts, and abilities to fully express in the dash between birth and death? What if, as a direct result of this horrible pandemic, we could rise out of the ashes with a new PPP, post-pandemic possibilities? The sooner you turn "it's impossible" to "I'm possible," the what ifs become possible too. Because you are loving, lovable, and loved, wrapped in a warm blanket of worthiness. But it may start with getting out of bed and making it. What if starts with you? So if you would like a copy of that short film, which is hopefully going to be distributed to every school for some inspiration and to give kids and teens and young adults some hope around this horrible year called the pandemic, that it's not something that we need to grieve, but there are definite possibilities after that. So if you're a distributor also looking at the short film, I would love to have a conversation with you. This is my first foray into an area that I've never done anything for, but it's already been submitted to 20 film festivals and getting some great reviews on the first rushes. So thank you for helping me. If anyone's interested in that, please do contact me and let me know. And as usual, at the end of every show, I give my Asian Oprah giveaways. And today's Asian Oprah giveaway is my book, The 8 Ways to Happiness from Wherever You Are. Those of you who know, it came 8 bestseller lists, as well as #1 on Amazon, #4 on Denver Post. If you would like a free audiobook copy of this, the Asian Oprah giveaway today is to go to drmarissa.life and put in the subject line Asian Oprah giveaway, and I will get the promo code so you can get that audiobook for you for free. And that way you can, I promise, if you do the exercises in the book, you will never hate yourself the same way again. And that's my promise to you. I'm Dr. Marissa. I hope you have enjoyed today's very important episode on how to move from stop the hate to choosing solidarity. Go to aapsrising.org for a lot of different ideas as well. If you are having some AAPI hate coming at you, please do report it at stopaapi.org, a place where they've collected, unfortunately, I think 3,800 or more now hate crimes, celebrating that the hate crime bill got passed, and knowing that there is hope, that we are doing something, that you are doing something. I would really love the support of everyone right now to do what they can. If you are supporting AAPIs in their work, in their movements, join their movements. We're also, there's money, energy that could be used any way that you can help, because like I said, change starts with awareness, but the most important step is the willingness to change and knowing that you will. This is Dr. Marissa reporting live. Peace in, peace out, world peace through inner peace. Have the best week ever.
Well, she has been dubbed the Asian Oprah, and she just wants all of us to be happy.
Dr. Marissa, aka the Asian Oprah, says the most important thing you can choose is choosing to be happy.
You are tuned into my weekly talk radio TV show called Take My Advice. I'm not using it. Get balanced with Dr. Marissa.
That's the idea for Dr. Marissa Pay's new book called 8 Ways to Be Happy.
Many of us say, I am my own worst critic. Nobody's harder on me than I am. And my response to that is, stop it! Why are you doing that to yourself? You have to be your biggest fan, because if you can't at the end of the day say, I did a good job, who is? We don't have to constantly be angry at the things that are wrong. Why don't we choose to be happy about things that are right? We have the choice. That's our muscle. And life is so amazing if we can see it.